Here is a fact that should not exist. In 1965, the sugar industry secretly paid Harvard scientists to rewrite the history of nutrition. Not to study it, not to question it, but to rewrite it. Their goal was simple and devastating. Make sugar look safe, and make fat look dangerous. And it worked. For 50 years, Americans blamed the wrong enemy. Parents removed butter from the table. Schools replaced eggs with cereal. Doctors warned about fat while entire companies quietly celebrated, because the real threat had been erased from the narrative. And the public never knew, not because the evidence was unclear, not because the science was uncertain, but because the documents proving the truth were hidden, buried in file cabinets, sealed behind corporate memos, and pushed into the footnotes of history. Until one day, researchers at the University of California stumbled on something they were not supposed to find: a collection of letters, payments, instructions, edits requested by sugar executives, entire paragraphs removed from scientific articles because they reflected poorly on sugar. It was, in every way, a quiet act of engineering, the construction of a scientific story designed not to protect the public, but to protect an industry. And this engineered version of reality changed everything. It shaped the American breakfast table. It shaped government dietary guidelines. It shaped medical advice. It shaped decades of advertising that taught families to fear fat and to trust sugar. But this story is not about nostalgia. It is not about dessert. It is not even about taste. It is about trust, misplaced, manipulated, and sold back to the public wrapped in scientific language. This is the part of American history that was never meant to be seen. But the paper trail remains. And once you follow it, the truth is impossible to ignore to understand how the industry reshaped nutrition. You have to understand the world Americans were living in before the manipulation began. In the early 1900s, sugar was expensive. It was a luxury, something for special occasions, holidays, celebrations. People used it sparingly because they had to. But everything changed after World War II. New factories, new machinery, new methods of refining. Suddenly, sugar became cheap, abundant, and available to every family. And when a product becomes abundant, companies need a story to sell it. For sugar, the story was simple: energy. Advertisements in the 1940s and 1950 seconds showed smiling mothers pouring sugar into cereal bowls while children laughed at the breakfast table. Slogans promised quick energy, instant strength, and the perfect start to your day. It wasn't enough to say sugar tasted good. That was obvious. The goal was to make sugar sound scientific, necessary, modern, a sensible part of daily life. And here is where the strategy becomes clear. Companies didn't just advertise to consumers, they advertised to doctors. They placed ads in medical journals claiming sugar could help mood, stabilize energy, and even support weight management. They suggested that a spoonful of sugar was better than a snack high in fat. Nothing was proven, but the claims sounded scientific enough for people to trust them, and the timing couldn't have been better. The United States was entering an era obsessed with modern living. Convenience foods, meals, powdered mixes. Everything had to be fast, clean, futuristic. Sugar fit perfectly into that narrative. It didn't spoil. It didn't require preparation. And it made every new food taste better. The breakfast cereal industry exploded. Snack companies multiplied. Entire aisles of supermarkets appeared, filled with products built on one ingredient: sugar. But here is the uncomfortable part. By the 1950s, scientists had already begun raising concerns. Early studies suggested sugar could affect cholesterol, metabolism, and heart health. The evidence wasn't complete, but it was enough to cause worry. If the public learned that sugar could be dangerous, everything the industry had built would collapse: marketing, product lines, partnerships, profits. That was the moment the companies realized taste wasn't enough. They needed science, or something that looked like science. So instead of changing their products or warning consumers, they did something far more effective. They began funding research, not to discover the truth, but to guide the truth, to shape what the public was told, to redirect the narrative before it even formed. This is when the industry stopped being a seller of sweetness and became a curator of information, one carefully crafted study at a time. The most disturbing part of this story isn't the marketing. It isn't even the cheerful ads showing children eating bowls of sugar-coated cereal. The truly unsettling part is what the companies did when the first signs of danger appeared. Because by the late 1950s, independent researchers were raising red flags. Small studies suggested that sugar might elevate cholesterol, inflame arteries, and contribute to heart disease. The evidence wasn't perfect, but it was enough to make the industry nervous. And instead of confronting the data, the Sugar Research Foundation made a decision that would redefine American health for half a century. They decided to manage the science, not through debate, not through discussion, but through influence. Internal documents uncovered decades later, memos, letters, payment records reveal the moment this decision was made. In one correspondence, executives openly discussed the need to protect the interests of the sugar industry. In another, they debated how to respond to emerging studies linking sugar to heart disease, concluding that they needed research that would refute the concerns. And so they created a plan. If science was drifting toward a conclusion they didn't like, they would fund new science. Science that pointed in a different direction. Science that blamed something else. And that something else was fact. The documents show negotiations between sugar executives and Harvard researchers, not about the purpose of the study, but about the outcome. Executives requested changes to drafts. They removed data that reflected poorly on sugar. They emphasized findings that made fat look dangerous, and the scientists, fully aware of the funding source, complied. One memo captured the entire strategy in a single sentence. Our particular interest is in minimizing the link between sucrose and heart disease. This was not neutral. This was not cautious. This was not responsible science. It was targeted storytelling wrapped in academic credibility, and it worked flawlessly. When the Harvard study was published in 1965, there was no mention of industry funding, no disclosure of conflicts of interest. To the public, it looked like pure objective research. Newspapers covered it as fact. Medical associations accepted it without hesitation. And over time, the study reshaped the national conversation. Sugar was safe. Fat was dangerous. Case closed. But here is what makes the documents even more unsettling. They showed that the industry didn't just influence one study. They monitored research across the entire country. Whenever a new paper suggested risks of sugar, they discussed how to respond. Sometimes they funded counter-studies. Sometimes they pressured universities. Sometimes they simply waited, hoping the public wouldn't notice. In one abandoned project, known as Project 159, early data suggested that sugar might be linked to bladder issues and changes in metabolism. According to the documents, the sugar industry quietly terminated the study before it was completed, not because the science was bad, but because the science was inconvenient. For decades, these files sat buried in archives, mislabeled, forgotten, until researchers at UCSF opened boxes that no one had touched in half a century. Inside were the letters, the budgets, the requests, the edits, the entire strategy laid out in paper. And when those papers were finally published in 2016, the story changed again. Not because the public had changed its diet, not because the science had been updated, but because the truth had finally resurfaced. A truth the industry tried to bury. A truth America was never meant to see. By the time the manipulated research had reshaped national health policy, sugar had already found its way into the American household, not just through candy or desserts, but through something far more strategic, something far more personal. Breakfast. In the 1970s and 82nd, American families woke up to the same ritual every morning. Cereal boxes lined across kitchen counters, cartoon mascots smiling, bright colors promising energy, fun, and a great start to your day. And almost no one realized that these boxes were quietly rewriting the meaning of healthy. Because while parents thought they were choosing something wholesome for their children, the companies behind those cereals were celebrating something else entirely. The perfect disguise. Sugar wasn't hiding in candy anymore. It was hiding in nutrition. Behind the scenes, executives discussed how to position sugary cereals as part of a balanced breakfast, even though internally they knew the products were overwhelmingly made of processed grains and added sweeteners. Marketing teams craft commercials showing athletes, smiling families, and bowls overflowing with fruit, all carefully designed to add legitimacy that the product itself did not have. And it worked because the public trusted them. Trust is the part nobody talks about. Trust is the ingredient that made everything possible. When a parent buys a food for their child, they're not reading scientific papers. They're believing what society tells them, what commercials tell them, what labels tell them. And the sugar industry knew this deeply. So they didn't just change science, they changed childhood. One internal marketing memo from a major cereal company openly stated that children were the primary drivers of brand loyalty. Translation: if you could get a kid hooked at age 6, you potentially had a customer for life. Another memo celebrated that their cereals were sweet enough to be eaten without additional sugar, even though the sugar content already exceeded what nutritionists considered acceptable. The goal wasn't moderation or transparency. The goal was habit. Sweetness as routine, sweetness as comfort, sweetness as normal. And the public never saw the shift happening. Why would they? Every smiling commercial, every friendly mascot, every box stamped with vitamins and minerals was telling parents the same thing: you're doing the right thing. This is good for your kids. But behind those claims was a formula created for a different reason entirely: addiction. Because sweetness is emotional, it quiets stress, it triggers pleasure, it makes a child stop crying, it makes a morning feel easier. Sugar companies knew this, and they didn't just study it, they built products around it. By the 1990s, American children were consuming more sugar at breakfast than entire generations once ate in a full day. Pediatricians warned about behavioral spikes, dentists warned about tooth decay, cardiologists warned about metabolic issues, but the warnings were drowned out by something louder: money. Every aisle of every supermarket became a battlefield where health wasn't the priority. Perception was. A battle fought not with facts, but with mascots, jingles, cartoons, and promises of whole grain printed in bold letters right above the fine print listing the sugar content. When researchers later reviewed the period, they found something chilling. The shift toward sugary cereals wasn't an accident. It was a coordinated strategy rooted in decades of research suppression, marketing psychology, and industry-funded messaging. This wasn't a nation that loved sugar by chance. It was a nation trained to love it. And the training started at breakfast. For years, the public debate about sugar sounded like nothing more than nutritional noise. One expert said one thing, another expert disagreed, and the average American just kept eating what they always had. But behind the confusion, something else was happening, something the industry understood perfectly. While scientists argued, people got sick. By the 1980s, the health landscape of the United States was changing in a way no one could ignore. Heart disease was rising, obesity rates were skyrocketing. Type 2 diabetes, once considered rare in children, began appearing in younger and younger ages. Doctors noticed patterns, but the patterns didn't match the story being told. If fat was the enemy, why were people getting sicker while eating low-fat foods? The answer was sitting in the ingredient lists. When companies stripped fat from products, they replaced it with sugar, not a little, but a lot. Yogurts, granola bars, salad dressings, fruit drinks, breads, even pasta sauces were reformulated to carry hidden sweetness. In some cases, the sugar content doubled, and because the industry had spent decades convincing the public that sugar was harmless, no one questioned it. Americans thought they were eating healthier. In reality, they were consuming more sugar than ever. Studies that should have sparked national alarm were quietly ignored or minimized. Early research showing links between sugar and inflammation never made headlines. Data suggesting sugar's effect on insulin resistance was left to gather dust, and the costs kept growing. For the first time in modern history, children were developing adult diseases. Pediatric clinics reported cases of fatty liver disease, something once seen almost exclusively in alcoholics, in kids under 12. Cardiologists saw early signs of arterial damage. Dentists reported unprecedented levels of tooth decay even in toddlers. Entire generations grew up inside an experiment they never agreed to join, and all of it rested on a simple illusion that sweetness was safe. But the illusion couldn't last forever. In 2016, a team of researchers at UCSF opened a set of long-forgotten boxes, documents from the Sugar Research Foundation that no one had touched in decades. Inside were letters, financial statements, research drafts, meeting notes, and slowly, a picture emerged, not of a misunderstanding, not of a scientific oversight, but of a coordinated effort to control what the world believed about sugar. The documents revealed the payments to Harvard researchers, the requests to edit scientific drafts, the decision to terminate studies that looked dangerous, the pressure applied to universities, the strategy to redirect blame toward fat, the systematic monitoring of any research that threatened the industry. It wasn't sloppy. It wasn't accidental. It was methodical, and the consequences were real. Today, metabolic diseases cost the United States hundreds of billions of dollars per year. Heart disease remains the leading cause of death. Millions struggle with conditions that could have been prevented, or at least reduced, if the truth had been acknowledged sooner. But perhaps the most painful part is not the health statistics. It's the realization that none of this was inevitable. Americans didn't choose this path. It was chosen for them. Chosen in boardrooms. Chosen in marketing plans. Chosen in memos that prioritized profits over people. And once you understand the scale of that choice, it becomes impossible to look at a simple packet of sugar, or a bowl of cereal, or a low-fat yogurt the same way again. Because behind every sweet moment was a bitter truth. A truth that stayed hidden until the paper trail finally resurfaced. When you look back at all the pieces, the manipulated research, the buried studies, the marketing disguised as health advice, the cereals engineered for addiction, the story becomes painfully clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a scientific debate. It was a quiet redirection of an entire nation's health. A redirection that shaped what people bought, what children ate, what doctors believed, what schools taught, what families trusted. And once you see the machinery behind it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing the small details, the labels, the wording, the way ingredients are hidden behind chemical names. You start questioning why so many foods feel normal, but weren't normal 100 years ago. You start realizing that the sweetness you grew up with wasn't just a flavor. It was a decision made far away from the dinner tables where the consequences would fall. And here is the uncomfortable truth. The story is not over. The same strategies that shaped the past are still alive in different industries today. The same pattern repeats: conceal, distract, rebrand, redirect. The players change, the products change, but the blueprint stays the same. And that's why archives matter. That's why documents matter. That's why truth buried in paper still holds power. Because once something is written down, it can be found, even decades later, even when someone hoped it wouldn't be. And if you want to keep uncovering these forgotten trails, the hidden decisions, the corporate fingerprints, the quiet manipulations that shape the modern world, then stay close. There are more files to open, more stories that were never meant to surface, more truths waiting in the paper trail. So if this investigation spoke to you, if it made you rethink something you always took for granted, then consider joining us. Subscribe, not for entertainment, but to stay informed, to stay awake, to never look at the world the same way again, because this was only one chapter, and the archive is just beginning.